Welcome to this week's Inclusion Revolution. I'm your host, Tova Sherman, and I'm very pleased you can join us here on Eastlink TV for another interesting show focused and dedicated to inclusion of persons with disabilities across our country and certainly in our community. I'm really pleased to have Peg Britton joining us today. Hi, Peg, and welcome.
Hi, Tova. Thank you.
And the reason Peg is with us today is to talk about the issue of self-advocacy. I know we hear that word sort of thrown around quite a bit, but just for today's purposes, self-advocacy is really being discussed as how an individual can advocate on their own behalf, or steps that individuals need to take, not just persons with disabilities, although I have found in my experience persons with disabilities need to be excellent self-advocates. So what we're really excited to do is to talk to Peg, who approached me actually about some of the challenges she had faced over her life as a person with disability and, again, trying to advocate on her own behalf. So I really appreciate you coming today, Peg, because often people want to come and talk about all the great ways they handled things, but the fact that you approached me and asked me to talk to you a little bit about self-advocacy and how to improve your record in terms of success around being a self-advocate made me really want to have you on the show and have the opportunity to have this dialogue and share it, of course, with our viewers. So, Peg, first of all, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about one of the first times where you saw yourself needing to be a self-advocate.
For sure, and I'm not sure if it may be the first time, but it was definitely something that sticks out in my memory. When I was in high school, I tried out for the rugby team, and understand that I was active in soccer before I was an amputee and then after I was an amputee. And when I got into high school, I didn't have quite the skill level to make the soccer team. So when rugby was offered, I said, well, I'd like to be active again, so let's try it out. And I made the team, did the practices, and got bumps and bruises just like everybody else. Yet when the first game came, I was taken into the principal's office at school, and they told me that I couldn't play the game because I was a liability.
Right. Now let me just stop there and make sure I'm getting it. I'm a bit of a paraphraser. First of all, what I'm hearing is you are an athletic kid. Forgive me, young lady now, but at the time we can call you a kid, right?
Sure.
You're an athletic kid, very busy in sports. You did have an amputation around that time in that high school time, or
just before.
Just before. Yeah. So as you transition into high school, ready to be an athlete again, of course, the concept for people to understand and appreciate that the fact that you have an amputee and you use as prosthetic somehow in their minds meant you couldn't play at all. Now they said you were a liability.
They said I was a liability. Someone might get hurt. Which is awfully funny because it's rugby. You look at the sport itself, it's a tough game, and I'm not that tough of a person, but the fact that one part of me was, a little bit tougher than the rest was it was a shock, because it was really the first time that I had ever been discriminated against. So that was hard to handle for a teenager, and
certainly at that time, especially because we're so vulnerable to the experiences of what we hear, and we start to, of course, buy some of that, and that's, of course, a greatest fear. And one of the things I want to share with you that makes a great self-advocate that others don't necessarily always think about first is the capacity not to let yourself complete the dialogue that they've started.
Yeah.
For instance, with anyone with a disability, of course, that dialogue being, well, maybe I'm not good enough to play. Maybe they're right. Maybe the liability is me.
Yeah.
And of course, if we continue that dialogue internally and carry on where they left off, we're in a much worse shape to start with. So I do want to share with you, you did something very wonderful, and that's the first step of being a self-advocate, and that's not finishing their negative dialogue, but saying, wait a minute, I know that not to be true, and I know that I need to make sure that they understand that what they're saying is not equalizing the playing field, but treating me like special, and of course special meaning put her aside, thank her for being here, pat her on the head and send her on her way, because we have a certain fear around, someone who has a prosthetic playing rugby. Now, as devil's advocate, I first have to ask you, was there any doctor or any medical expert who felt that it might be more dangerous for you or for anyone else in the game if you were to play?
It wasn't through any doctors, it wasn't through any kind of medical professional, and it just didn't make sense to me, because I'd been playing in provincial sports before as an amputee, and as I said, before I was an amputee. So it just didn't make sense to me.
So the deal is, when something like this happens, whether it's a school issue with a doctor or with anyone, and you feel that you are not being treated fairly, because fair and equitable is what it's all about in our community and what Inclusion Revolution really fights for. So you clearly met a place where you didn't believe it to be fair.
True.
You understood that, but you weren't quite sure the next steps to take. Although you already took the first step, as mentioned, which is not to buy what they're selling, in a sense, and to be sure that that's medically not the case. Your own doctor or any of your own medical people that you've spoken to, no one had concern or had provided you any reason where they would like you to avoid sports.
Not at all. And in fact, it was quite the opposite, because they wanted me to lead a quote-unquote normal life, just like, you know, the other players on my soccer teams in junior high or before then.
So your medical experts were saying, go for it.
Yeah.
And clearly the school had some concerns about what it might mean. Now, I do want to say to you what I tell a lot of people when I do disability awareness training, and that is I really don't believe it's a lack of sensitivity as much as a lack of knowing. I'm certainly not defending every decision that's ever been made based on lack of awareness, because we should educate ourselves better, but I do have that, I do believe that to be so, and I believe it's important to identify that. Now, what was your first steps as a self-advocate that you took that you felt were important? And can you also share with me a little bit why you chose those steps?
Sure thing. Well, I mean, the first reaction was to cry my eyes out because I was upset. After I got over that, of course, I told my parents, and I'm sure they were the ones that really drove the next step, which was getting in touch with old physical education teachers from junior high and elementary school, getting a hold of my soccer coaches from the summer leagues and also from junior high, because I played for the school team, and getting those letters of support from them to help prove that, you know what, I'm just like everybody else and I can play the game just like everybody else. So that mostly were the first steps that I took.
Right. Now, they're very logical steps, again, to have proofs, essentially, to go towards trying to change the mind of the powers that be by saying, this is what the medical experts are saying, this is what my coaches are saying, and perhaps if you were to read that, that would change your mind. And certainly that is certainly a reasonable step to self-advocacy. How did it work out?
Well,
it didn't?
It didn't.
Okay.
It was probably not the best first effort. Well, I mean, it was a good first effort on my part, but, you know, there was just not a lot of follow-through on my part because, you know, I just started to actually kind of believe what they were trying to sell me, as you said. And it's not that I lost passion, because I still, you know, went to the games and supported the team. It hurt a lot to just sit on the sidelines because I knew I could be out there.
Well, first of all, let me again appreciate the fact that you show a great deal of character in continuing to support a team, even though you yourself were excluded and aren't quite sure how you could have perhaps handled that a little bit better. What I do want to say right off the top, and again, this is relevant to all of our listeners when we try to advocate about any issue, is I love that Judge Judy. Not all the time, but I take her in small doses. And one of the things she says is paper wins. And I always believe that no matter what, when we're talking about self-advocacy, we need to start our little scribbler. And we need to keep everything in that scribbler that we've done towards us. Who we talked to, what time we talked to them, what they said, when they said it, what your follow-up was, and of course, everything else. And it may sound rather mundane to some people, or to be honest with you, it may just sound like more work than it's worth. But the truth be told, with a paper record of your activities, you are really, quite frankly, 100 times likely to have success, because people can't go back and say, I didn't say that, or that never happened, or and you know, I'm not saying that did happen, but I'm saying it does commonly occur in any self-advocacy issue. Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is, when we come back, talk about some of the ways that situation, maybe as an example, could have been taken through. And again, this is, as you know, no indictment to you, but you had asked me, how could that have been different? And I'd like to share with you and share with our viewers, when we come back from a break, what that's going to be. I'm here with Peg Britton. We're talking about one of the most important issues we can, and that is self-advocacy for persons with disabilities, and how some of the really best practices. So do come back after this break. We'll be right back.